Hello, I'm Philip Booth, Director of the Vincent Centre for the Public Understanding of Economics and Entrepreneurship at the University of Buckingham. Welcome to this explainer on the financial sector. In many ways, we take the financial sector for granted. We tend to assume that we would be more prosperous without it. Commentators often lament that clever mathematicians or physicists, for example, end up in the financial sector rather than becoming engineers and building bridges. Indeed, people down the ages have criticised the financial sector for being either useless or dangerous. Lord Adair Turner, former head of the financial regulator, said in a report on the financial crisis that much of what goes on in the financial sector is socially useless. Around 800 years earlier, St. Thomas Aquinas said, "To take usury or interest for money lent is unjust in itself, because this is to sell what does not exist, and this evidently leads to inequality, which is contrary to justice." President Roosevelt, in his inaugural address nearly 90 years ago, said, "Practices of the unscrupulous money changers stand indicted in the court of public opinion, rejected by the hearts and minds of men." The financial sector is vital to any modern economy, contrary to what is suggested by these commentators, experts, and great intellectuals. The total value added by the UK financial sector is £132 billion. This represents about 7% of all output, but only just over 3% of all jobs. In other words, the financial sector is a very high productivity sector. A relatively small number of people are producing a rather higher proportion of national output. That is why many clever physicists go and work for banks rather than build bridges. Jobs in the financial sector seem to be productive and pay highly. Around 50% of the financial sector output is exported. The UK has a huge trade surplus in financial services of £41 billion, or about 3% of national income, which of course allows us to buy imported manufacturing goods that can be made relatively cheaper elsewhere. As I mentioned, much of the financial sector was described as socially useless by Lord Adair Turner, former head of the financial regulator in Britain. That is an odd thing to say when such a large proportion of its output is exported. Why would people in other countries want to buy useless services? So, what does the financial sector do? What is this value that it adds? The Nobel Prize winner Ronald Coase once said, "A large part of what we think of as economic activity is designed to accomplish what high transactions costs would otherwise prevent." Transactions costs are a huge issue in economics, but ignoring them often makes our models simpler, so they don't get the attention they deserve. A good example of an industry that exists only because of transactions costs is the retail sector. Its sole function is to reduce transactions costs, not to produce anything tangible. If you want a roast chicken dinner in the absence of supermarkets, you would have to go to one farm to buy a chicken, another farm or shop perhaps to buy a cabbage, another farm or shop to buy potatoes, and so on. These so-called transactions costs would be enormous, far greater than the cost, in fact, of the ingredients. The retail sector makes possible what would otherwise be impossible by reducing transactions costs. Of course, the internet has transformed retail further by reducing transactions costs to an even greater degree without the need for a visible retail store. And in fact, the financial sector is the same. It exists to reduce transactions costs, and the internet is also beginning to transform much of the financial sector. To save for retirement without a financial sector would be something that only the incredibly rich could do. Pension funds, unit trusts, and so on allow us to invest in a huge range of companies very cheaply, therefore diversifying risks. They also assess the risks of different companies and investment projects and monitor their performance. every individual who was saving would have to otherwise assess the viability of every company in which he or she invested or to which he or she lent money with the hope of a return. Without the financial sector, retirement would be simply impossible, except for the very wealthy. Without insurance companies, pooling risks would be impossible. I would not be able to protect myself from the catastrophic financial risk of my house burning down. A business wouldn't be able to protect itself from being flooded or from fire risks. Banks provide money transfer services so that I can buy goods and services and pay for them by transferring my money into the account of somebody else. If we had to barter or use gold as money, it would be incredibly expensive. Banks allow me to save and allow companies and other individuals to borrow. Individuals and companies can borrow over a long time period, for example, to fund the purchase of a house or to fund business investment, whilst the households who are saving money are able to get instant access to their funds if they need to do so. That is a key function of banks. It would be disastrous for businesses and those buying houses if they couldn't borrow money over long time periods. But it would also be seriously problematic if individuals who are saving had to tie their money up for very long periods of time. Without the financial sector, the basic functions within an economy really couldn't continue. The problems caused by financial crises are for another day. However, if the financial sector really were useless, we would not be quite so concerned about it crashing. Almost any daily economic activity that you undertake would in fact be impossible without a thriving financial sector. So perhaps we should end by repeating once again the wise words of Ronald Coase in his Nobel Prize lecture. A large part of what we think of as economic activity is designed to accomplish what high transactions costs would otherwise prevent. Thank you for listening.